outrageous statement from the outgoing president of Kenya, Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, is that on a daily we're losing close to 2 billion shillings here in the country. Now, at the heart of today's conversation is, are African governments solely responsible for the misuse of public funds? With us in this motion today, we have St. Bakhita Siakago versus Mary Leakey girls. And their motion reads, African governments are solely responsible for the misuse of public funds. Team proposition, first speaker, you have 3 minutes. All the best to both teams.
African governments are solely responsible for the misuse of public funds. On stage is Hinga Winnie from the Mary Leakey Girls High School proposing these motions. I'll start by defining some terms. Government means a group of people who are responsible for controlling a country or a state. Solely means not involving anyone or anything else. Public funds means all the money, inclusive of non-tax money, used in operation of governing bodies. Misuse of public funds refers to any unauthorized, improper, or illegal use of government funds, resources, or property for personal gain or other non-public purposes. I will start by my first point. Poor decision-making. Poor decision-making by African governments. I'll give an example of Zimbabwe. In 2008 in Zimbabwe, there was a great economic decline influenced by government debt, decline in economic output, decline in export earning. To finance the higher debt, the government responded by giving a short-term solution, which was printing more money. Printing more money means, printing more money leads to inflation of the economy. This resulted to unemployment of up to 80%. Now, this inflation led to the decrease of value in notes. Imagine buying a bread for 2 billion. 2 billion, for heaven's sake. One bread costs 2 billion. Just because of the government's poor implementation, poor policies, and poor decision making, and also poor opposers from our team. Corruption. Corruption is a subject that most of you here have heard about. Most of you know about corruption here, don't you? You do. This has been a topic talked about by everyone here. Everyone knows about corruption. What is this corruption doing? It is in African governments. The African governments are so corrupted. I'll give an example of Congo. Congo is a country with many resources. They are rich in resources, but yet it is not rapidly developing. Why? And you opposers here are trying to make us see like it is the public fault. How is the public involved in this? The public is not involved in it. It is the government's poor implementation of plans, the government's poor strategy, the government's poor decision making. The government is to be blamed for all of this. Solely, the government is to be blamed. All the blame goes back to the government. I do not care what you say, but I stand by my point.
First speaker, team opposition, you have 3 minutes.
African governments are solely responsible for the misuse of public funds. This is a subject of discussion that runs through the mouths of Africans, Kenyans included, day in, day out. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Alexia Shali from the Great St. Bakhita Girls in opposition of this motion today. So, it's always about government this, government that. But why are we always blaming the government when indeed these administrative bodies are just a leading part of the nation, but indeed the major people to be considered are the citizens? But before that, allow me to introduce the motion in itself. What are the African governments we are talking about? Because it would be a shame if we generalized and said that all governments of countries in Africa would fall under this category. So in this motion, we're talking about the governments of nations in Africa that have led their countries to a downfall rather than a development economically, which is expected of them. And so when we say that they are solely responsible, we imply that they are to take all the blame, and I insist, all the blame for the misuse, or rather mismanagement, of funds that have been allocated to serving the people of the nation, the citizens. So my point today is on the ideological factors that have been put in place for the citizens in various systems. I would like to contextualize in the school system, where we all know that in most schools today, or rather to be precise, public schools, the government allocates a specific amount of money for each and every one of the projects that are instituted, whether infrastructural or academic. And so, however, whenever this money lands into the hands of the school management, some way, somehow, it ends up being used for different things which were not previously budgeted for. And what is the end result? What was initially planned for ends up being forced to take a squeeze, or being done under a low budget. And we all know cheap is expensive. So what is the result? Later, sooner rather than later, there arises the need to redo the same thing, or do a sort of refurbishing, which would not have been necessary if the initial goal had been met. And so the school is just but an example of a place where public funds are mismanaged, not by the government, but by the citizens themselves. In fact, according to the Standard newspaper, the government set a special audit to investigate the loss of funds allocated by the government for various projects. This was done through ghost projects, where various institutions were not able in any way to give an account of how they used the money that was allocated to them. Again, there was the unjustified over expenditure in this systems. And this shows clearly that the government indeed does their duty, which is to allocate the funds. But what happens once this money is in the hands of the citizens? They misuse it. And our proposing team here mentioned that there's the corruption and poor planning by the government. But I feel like you have not clearly brought out how the government is solely responsible for the misuse of public funds. It is evident, therefore, that it is not solely the government, but indeed the citizens, out of their perhaps ignorance or greed, that are solely responsible for the misuse of public funds. Thank you.
Second speaker, team proposition. You have 3 minutes.
African government is solely responsible for the misuse of public funds. It is I, Christina Tieno, from the Leakey Girls High School, proposing this motion. To start with, you said, why are we blaming the government? Who else are we supposed to blame apart from the government? Tell me. Who else are we supposed to blame? Of course it is the government. Why? Because the government is the one who is responsible for the funds. To my first point, mismanagement. In some cases, public funds have been mismanaged to poor planning by government officials. This can result in funds being allocated to projects that are not a priority or not feasible, leading to waste and inefficiency. A good example. In 2018, the government of South Africa spent 24 million just to build a statue of our former president, Jacob Zuma, which was widely criticized as a waste of public funds. Yet, an estimated 500,000 of disabled children didn't have access to education. So, it's like you're trying to tell me you're going to buy shoes every day. Why? You put on the shoe, it gets torn on that same day, then you return to the shop again. Kindly let me check if you have torn shoes. Such projects can have significant financial implication of government and their citizens, with resources being diverted from more pressing needs such as health, education, and infrastructure development. Second point, nepotism. In some African countries, government have been accused of awarding contracts and jobs to friends and families instead of qualified individuals and organizations. This can lead to the misuse of public funds, as contracts are given to companies that may not have expertise or experience to deliver quality work. So, let's say the government has given money to the people who construct roads. Okay. So these people go and construct the road. Then after a month, you find that the road has potholes and accidents are occurring. Why waste funds?
Second speaker, team opposition, you have 3 minutes.
Well, a wise man once said, "It is good to speak what's in your mind, but it is better to mind a speech." Within the few minutes that I've been on this podium, I've noticed that the proposition side is deliberately contradicting to this saying. Well, Rispa Mikali from the great Siakago, hi, here to firstly confute on what the first proposer spoke about. Well, technically, government's decision making is due to the human activities, due to its governments, or in general, its citizens, the activities that the citizens do in its countries. And for the first proposer, you didn't make it vivid to us as to why Congo is on the verge of an economic decline. Anyways, to my first point as to why I oppose this motion. Technically, human beings are social beings, and at most times tend to differ in terms of diversity of thoughts, which is very much normal based on my fanatism. This often leads to conflicts. Conflicts in definition, which is serious argument between people, groups, or states, often brings about, arises to effects due to skirmish between communities and countries. For instance, the Kenya-Somalia conflict, which was due to economical and maritime border conflicts, led to terrorist attacks, home invasions, and displacement of people, and majorly misuse of public funds. Yes, misuse of public funds. Well, according to statistics by Mansob Abdurrahman of Umma University, it takes about 7,000 in a day to keep a Kenyan soldier in Somalia, which in a month is 210,000. Which in a month is 210,000. In a year, it equalizes to 2.52 million. You can calculate if you really have doubts. For a fact is that there are at least 4,000 soldiers in Somalia. This means that it takes 10.8 billion to keep these soldiers in war, a war that has no end in sight, is said by the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. Frank enough to say, it is the responsibility of the government to ensure the safety of its nation, of its people, but it is losing tons of money on a scheme that can be easily dealt and settled with. If there was peace and stability between these countries, then public funds could have not been used to incur on the losses made by we Africans, we people, we humankind in general. On to my second point, the manipulation of economy through use of single currency in international trade. If we had a stable currency, if there was removal of currency barriers, if there was elimination of currency risk and conversion costs, then economically developing nations could have benefited from this. But due to one world different currencies, some nations tend to succumb to financial autonomy. For instance, China, a nation with an enormous economy, exports more than it imports. And for this reason, the currency is devalued. Main reason being that less dollars can buy more Chinese currency. Likewise to Kenya, where more Kenyan currency can buy less dollars. By this, devaluation of money is continuous by increasing money supply in the country. In one way or the other, there is misuse of public funds. With these levels of intensification, I believe to have inculcated you to support the opposition side of the House on our today's motion. Thank you.
Both teams have been asked their different questions. Team propositions have been asked to clarify how exactly is the government using their funds inappropriately by improving infrastructure, and team opposition have been asked to elaborate how the citizens are exactly responsible for misuse of public funds. Third speaker, team proposition, you have 3 minutes.
I am Angel Margaret from the prestigious Mary Leakey Girls High School. So I was asked the questions that how is the government misusing public funds by improving infrastructure? Which infrastructure are we talking about? No, tell me, which infrastructure are we talking about? Since this government that we have in Africa is basically putting ghost projects just to fool you so that you can think that they are putting infrastructure which is not even there. Take an example of the Kimorel Dam, Kimorel and Arol Dam. The Kenyan government received 16.2 billion from the Italian bank Intesa San Paolo for the construction of the Kimorel Dam and the Aurora Dam. Yet, to date, the dams are not yet finished. They are not yet, the construction has not yet come to an end. So this government of ours really has poor decision makings. How am I talking about poor decision makings? First of all, we come to the case of corruption. About my first speaker talked about how the schools are corrupt and all. Who gives the schools these funds? Isn't it the government who is responsible to look for the accounting of these funds? Isn't it the government? So this really shows how poor our government is in accounting for the funds that they are giving to these schools. To take an example, during COVID-19, there was really high, there were overpriced contacts. Let's say, take an example of the masks. Some masks were being sold at 150 Kenyan shillings. At that point, even just raising 20 shillings to cater for your basic needs was really, really hard. But the government is allowing these organizations to sell these masks at 150 shillings. Seriously, is this the government that you want to work with? A government that is putting overpriced contacts on the Kimorel Dam. After, on the Kimorel Dam, the body in charge complained that it was bankrupt, even after receiving 7.2 billion for the project and an additional 3.5 billion on July 2nd, 2018. To add salt to the injury, on September 27th, 2018, 4.3 billion was added to this project. Yet they are complaining that they are bankrupt. Really? How can you be bankrupt after receiving a total of 15 billion, yet the government was given 16.2 billion? Where did the other 1.2 billion go to? And the project was cancelled in 2019. Food for thought.
Team opposition, third speaker, you have 3 minutes.
Seems like my fellow lasses here are lacking something. Well, I'm here to give it. My name is Caroline Muki from the Great Bakhita School. So you talked about in Congo that the resources they are still going bankrupt and their government is stealing. Let me tell you something. According to the motion, it's solely responsible. But in Congo, the government is not the only one responsible for those resources not going through. Something you should know. The citizens are involved. When it is being mined there, it is stolen from there some. Do your research very well. And another thing, you were talking about which infrastructures. She talked about roads. And you want to mean that which infrastructures, meaning that the Thika Road was not an infrastructure done by the government in Kenya? It wasn't? You seem not to have heard my first speaker here. She said that the project will be squeezed. So when the government comes to check, they'll be like, it is done. But it will need repairment because cheap is expensive. Is that the government's fault? So, on to my points. I will be talking about the IMF manipulation. The IMF simply means the international monetary funds whereby they target corrupt countries. I repeat, yes, corrupt countries to lend them money. So, as it is a corrupt country, the money will go slavishly inside and will be used all. Due to the pressure of the citizens, where do you think that this government will turn back to? The IMF, whereby it is open to lend money. Let me quote some of the shareholders of the IMF. These are the USA, UK, and Germany. These are well-developed countries. Taking advantage of these corrupt countries, they come give them money. And when they want it back, they don't even care. So the government is forced to tap into public funds. I know someone will argue, but isn't this the fault of the government that they are going to borrow? But let me ask you something. Why can't the IMF, as they claim to be a brotherhood system, be able to enlighten this government on anti-corruption to fight the money getting lost? Why? That's my question to you as I leave. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
The reply speech is 1 minute. Team proposition, kindly give your reply speech.
My fellow opposer asked if it's the government responsibility that the infrastructure bought was cheap or of poor quality. Yes, it is the government's responsibility, since it should be keen on auditing how the money it gave to the schools, how it was used. It should be keen in auditing to the latter. To close my remarks it is important for citizens to hold their government accountable and responsible in the transparency of the management of public funds, since these public funds mainly come from us, the citizens who pay taxes, right? And to sum it all up, I urge all of you to join our proposing team in the motion that states African governments are solely responsible for the misuse of public funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Team opposition, you have 1 minute to make your closing remarks.
In my opinion, team proposition, you're not listening. We simply said that the government did their responsibility of allocating the funds. It is not the responsibility of the government to follow up on what it has already employed people to follow up and handle these funds that they allocate. So you're suggesting that the government should allocate funds, follow again the schools to look at what they did with the funds, how the funds went. That is not the responsibility of the government. The government employed people in the school management, the people under the TSC. They're employed, the head teacher, they're employed to look at how these funds will be managed. And then again, there's a point of contradiction. You people said that building of roads is a wasted investment. How? There's the repair of potholes. When the government itself does not repair potholes, what does this do to the citizens? It brings them to a problem, especially those who are driving. And then a wide criticism against the building of Zuma's statue. It does not show, it simply shows that these people did it out of patriotism and respect for their leader. So just because something was opposed by many people in the country does not suggest that it was the wrong thing. It was just a show of patriotism and respect.
The main argument here would have been on that word solely. And it was very easy, in fact, for Mary Leakey to have thrashed your points, St. Bakhita, but they didn't utilize that, particularly when they spoke about misuse of funds in schools. You know, government gives money to government schools. So even these schools are part of government. You get? Because you're talking about government as general. When they talk about troops, government has a way to actually call these troops out of Somalia. When they talk about IMF, government have responsibilities to pull out of these treaties or even make decisions not to borrow from this IMF But Mary Leakey did not take on this, and so you did not rebuttal your opponents, and so their points became stronger than yours. St. Bakhita Jr., I liked the composure and the flow of your argument. The three of you had the sense of you are organized in the way you presented your arguments, and even in the style of delivery.
Mary Leakey, I think, Winnie, you're very passionate. I like the passion. I mean, you take the stage and you grab our attention because we have to listen to you, which is good. It's a style that you have. So, and I like the examples you gave, Zimbabwe and all. I think the only correction, I think I even had to check, was the bread 2 billion or 2 million. And I think it's about 2 million or so, which was still very high anyway. I think the point you're trying to say is that they are solely to blame for those kind of price hikes of printing more money. Good example. So I think in terms of the walkthrough, some of the countries you gave us, I would have expected more, but at least you mentioned a few. Christine, South Africa example, stature example of Zuma, I guess that's what you talked about, and how it's regarded as a waste of money compared to what the money would have done. I think that was a very good example as well. However, your rebuttals were weak. Angel, yes, that's the name, Angel. I think you spent a lot of time with talking about the dams in Kenya, and you can easily be accused because in as much as you give examples that quite a number of people, and even I know, we have had those discussions out, they were not referenced. So it is very important that anytime you're quoting someone or quoting figures like that, you want to really point out, all right, where you got them from, so that, because people are going to accuse you and say those are still cases in court.
The judges have awarded Mary Leakey Jr. with 62.5%. A round of applause for Mary Leakey. And the judges have awarded St. Bakhita Jr. team 68.9%. A round of applause for St. Bakhita. And the winners of this debate are St. Bakhita Jr. A round of applause for our winning team. And until next time, it is goodbye from us here at the Debate Circle. Please make sure to check our socials on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Instagram at the Debate Circle.